The apartment was too quiet for a married man. Daniel sat alone at the small dining table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space where conversation used to live. The overhead light was off, only the warm glow of a lamp in the corner softened the room. It was nearly 10 p.m. His dinner sat in front of him, half-eaten, reheated for the second time. Pasta again. Always pasta when Rachel worked late. The microwave clock blinked 9:58, each second ticking forward with a patience that felt almost mocking. He chewed slowly, not because he was hungry, but because stopping would mean acknowledging how familiar this moment had become. This was routine now. Daniel reached for his phone, not out of urgency, but habit. He didn't expect a message yet. Part of him always did. The screen lit up, sharp and sudden in the dim room. One notification, her name, Rachel. He unlocked the phone with a calm swipe. Staying late with my boss again. Don't wait. That was it. No apology, no explanation. No I miss you. Just a statement, casually delivered, as if it were weather or traffic, as if his time existed only to be dismissed. Daniel stared at the words longer than he needed to. His face didn't change, no clenched jaw, no racing heart. He didn't feel the sting he probably should have felt. In fact, what surprised him most was how normal it felt. He set the phone down beside his plate. On the surface, he was fine. He'd mastered that version of himself, the composed husband, the understanding partner, the man who trusted, the man who didn't question ambition. But somewhere beneath that calm exterior, something quiet began to move. Not pain, not rage, recognition. His mind drifted uninvited to the past few months. The same message, reshaped slightly each time. Running late, emergency meeting, client dinner, always her boss, always work, always delivered just late enough that dinner plans died without discussion. At first, he'd responded the way a good husband does. Drive safe, I'll keep food warm. Miss you. He remembered waiting on the couch, lights on, TV muted. Remembered checking the time. Remembered lying to himself that love meant patience. But patience, he was starting to realize, had slowly turned into absence. Another memory surfaced, Rachel laughing at something on her phone weeks ago, turning the screen away when he walked by. The new perfume that didn't smell like her. The sudden password change she'd brushed off as company policy. All small things, individually meaningless. Together, they formed a pattern. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the faint creak of wood sounding louder than it should have. He wasn't angry. That was the strange part. There was no heat in his chest, no urge to accuse or demand. What he felt instead was a kind of cool awareness. Like stepping back and finally seeing the whole picture after staring at fragments for too long. Clarity didn't hurt the way betrayal did. It didn't shout. It didn't beg for attention. It simply arrived. He picked up his phone again, thumb hovering over the screen. This was the moment where he usually asked the question, when will you be home? The words almost typed themselves. Muscle memory and hope tangled together. He deleted them. Daniel exhaled slowly, then typed something else. Something neutral, polite, emotionless. Okay? One word, no punctuation, no warmth. He sent it and placed the phone face down on the table. The ticking clock continued its steady rhythm, but it no longer felt accusatory. For the first time that night, Daniel stood up without heaviness in his chest. He carried his plate to the sink, rinsed it clean, and turned off the lamp. And for the first time, he didn't ask when she'd be home. In the beginning, love had been effortless. Daniel still remembered their first apartment, the one with the crooked balcony door, and the neighbor who played loud music at midnight. They didn't care. They stayed up talking anyway, curled together on a couch they couldn't afford, sharing dreams like secrets. Rachel used to trace circles on his arm while he spoke, her way of saying, I'm listening. They laughed easily then, laughed about nothing, laughed until their stomachs hurt. Even silence felt full. Back then, trust wasn't something they discussed, it simply existed. They cooked together after work, stealing bites from each other's plates. Late nights weren't spent waiting, they were spent planning. Vacations they'd take someday, careers they'd build side by side. Rachel used to say, no matter how busy we get, we'll always come home to each other. Daniel believed her. He had no reason not to. Somewhere along the way, warmth became routine. Routine became distance. The shift wasn't sudden. It never is. It started with Rachel's phone buzzing during dinner. Then with work calls answered in the bedroom, voice lowered, door closed. Promotions followed. New titles, new clothes, new confidence that didn't include him the way it once had. Work stopped being something she did and became something she was. Rachel began measuring time in meetings and achievements. Conversations shortened. Questions turned into updates. When Daniel asked about her day, she responded like she was delivering a report, efficient, detached, already halfway somewhere else. Her laughter changed too. It wasn't gone, just redirected. Daniel adjusted without complaint. He always had. He learned to eat alone. Learned to cancel plans quietly when she ran La Tagan. Learned to tell friends, she's busy with work, as if it were a badge of honor instead of an excuse. When she apologized, he smiled and said he understood. When she forgot anniversaries or brushed past small disappointments, he told himself love meant flexibility. Understanding became his habit. The first real wound didn't come from a lie. It came from an absence. One night, Rachel came home earlier than expected. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, the TV still on. He woke briefly as she stepped over his legs, careful not to disturb him. In the past, she would have smiled, kissed his forehead, maybe woken him just to say she was home. This time, she didn't. She went straight to the shower, phone in hand, door closing softly behind her. Daniel lay there staring at the ceiling, fully awake now, a hollow realization settling into his chest. She hadn't missed him. That thought stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. Rachel began talking about her boss more often after that. Evan this. Evan thinks. Evan needs. Always framed professionally, always casual. He's intense, but brilliant, she said once, almost admiringly. Another time she laughed, telling Daniel how Evan joked that she worked harder than anyone else on the team. Daniel listened. He always listened, but something about the way she said his name lingered too familiar, too present. Evan wasn't just a colleague in her stories. He was a constant. A shared world Daniel wasn't part of. Still, Daniel said nothing. He told himself it was paranoia. That success changed people, that marriage required patience during seasons of growth. He reminded himself of who they had been, of promises made in dimly lit rooms, years ago. He chose faith over fear. Silence felt safer than accusation. But beneath that silence, something fragile was cracking. Daniel sensed it in the way Rachel no longer looked for him in a room, in how she spoke about the future as if he were an accessory, not a partner, in how easily she left and how rarely she hurried back. One evening, as she rushed out the door for yet another late meeting, Rachel paused briefly, already distracted, keys in hand. "Don't wait up," she said. Daniel nodded, offering the same calm smile he always did, but as the door closed behind her, he stood alone in the quiet and felt the truth settle in, heavy and undeniable. He wasn't afraid of losing her, he was afraid she'd already left. Red flags never announced themselves in Daniel's marriage. They didn't arrive with slammed doors or lipstick on collars. They came quietly, disguised as coincidence, wrapped in explanations that sounded reasonable enough to accept if you wanted to. It started with the phone. Rachel had always been careless with it, leaving it face up on the counter, tossing it onto the bed without a second thought. One evening, Daniel noticed she placed its screen down before heading to the shower, a small thing, easy to ignore. Then came the password change. When he asked about it, she barely looked up. "Company policy," she said. "Security update." Her tone wasn't nervous, just final, like the subject wasn't open for discussion. Then there was the perfume. Rachel had worn the same light floral scent for years, something soft and familiar. One night, as she brushed past Daniel in the hallway, he caught a sharper fragrance. Darker, confident. It lingered in the air long after she'd gone. When he mentioned it casually, she laughed. "Oh, that free sample from the office?" she said. "You notice the weirdest things." The way she said it made him feel foolish for asking. New clothes followed. Tailored dresses, heels she'd never worn before. She said the company image mattered now, that appearances were part of the job. Daniel nodded, though he couldn't remember the last time she dressed that carefully for him. None of it was proof, that was the problem. Daniel began watching instead of reacting. He noted the way she angled her phone away when typing, how she stepped outside to take calls she used to answer freely, how questions as simple as "who's that?" were met with a sigh, a tightened jaw, a quick, defensive response. "Why are you interrogating me?" she snapped once. The word stung. Interrogating. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't accused, he'd only asked. And yet, somehow, he was the one made to feel guilty. Inside, Daniel wrestled with himself. One part of him wanted to trust her blindly, to cling to the version of Rachel he'd married. That part whispered that he was overthinking, that suspicion was the quickest way to poison something good. The other part, the quieter, sharper, one kept track. It replayed moments at night, stitching them together into something uncomfortable. It asked questions Daniel didn't want to answer. It reminded him that patterns mattered more than excuses. One evening, the tension almost broke. Rachel came home later than usual, distracted, glowing with a kind of energy Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. She dropped her bag and headed straight for the bedroom. Daniel followed, heart pounding not with rage, but resolve. "Rachel," he said, "we need to talk." She stopped, turned slowly, her expression already guarded. "About what?" The words pressed against his chest, ready to spill. "Who is he? Why are you lying? Do you still want this marriage?" But he hesitated. In that pause, he saw it clearly, the denial she'd offer. The way she'd flip the conversation, accuse him of insecurity, of mistrust. He'd seen it happen before in smaller ways. He knew how it would end. He swallowed the confrontation. "Nothing," he said instead. "Just forget it." Rachel studied him for a moment, suspicion flashing across her face. Then relief. "I'm exhausted," she said, turning away. "We'll talk later." Later never came. That night, lying beside her, Daniel realized how gaslighting worked. Not through blatant lies, but through erosion. Through making someone doubt their instincts, question their memory, feel unreasonable for noticing what was right in front of them, and the more he stayed quiet, the more she assumed he knew nothing. That assumption was her mistake. Daniel stopped seeking reassurance. He stopped asking questions that led nowhere. Silence, he discovered, had weight. It allowed him to observe without being manipulated, to see without revealing what he knew. If she thought he wasn't paying attention, that was her mistake. Rachel always said his name casually. Evan thinks we should push the campaign deadline. Evan asked me to stay late again. Evan says I'm the most reliable person on the team, just my boss, she'd add, as if that explanation closed every door. Daniel didn't picture Evan clearly at first. He imagined a faceless executive, older, distant, buried in spreadsheets and authority. Someone abstract, someone safe. That illusion lasted until the night Daniel finally met him. The company hosted a formal networking event downtown, one of those polished gatherings filled with glass walls, soft lighting, and conversations that sounded important without saying much. Rachel insisted Daniel come. It'll be good for you to meet people, she said. Her tone was light, but there was something tight underneath it. Evan Moore was impossible to miss. He stood near the center of the room, tall, perfectly tailored suit, silver threaded subtly through his dark hair. He carried himself like someone accustomed to being listened to. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he laughed, it was measured, confident, practiced. Rachel spotted him immediately. Daniel noticed the shift before she ever moved. Her posture straightened. Her voice softened. When Evan turned and smiled at her, it wasn't the polite smile she offered strangers. It was warmer, familiar. Daniel, this is Evan, she said when she finally led Daniel over. My boss. Evan extended his hand, gripped firm, eyes steady. He didn't rush the handshake, held it just a fraction longer than necessary. So you're the husband, Evan said, tone amused, eyes flicking briefly over Daniel before returning to Rachel. She talks about you. Daniel smiled politely. Only good things, I hope. Evan chuckled. She's very dedicated. The word hung there, heavy with implication. As the evening unfolded, Daniel watched the subtle games play out. Evan positioned himself close to Rachel, ever touching, but always within reach. When she spoke, he maintained eye contact, a second too long. When others interrupted, he gently redirected the conversation back to her, as if staking a claim. Rachel responded in ways Daniel hadn't seen before. She laughed more, touched Evan's arm briefly when making a point, leaned in when he spoke, her attention fully his. She looked at him the way she used to look at Daniel, engaged, impressed, eager. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, but it wasn't jealousy. It was insult. Evan spoke to Daniel once more later in the night, this time with a drink in hand. Voice lowered. Your wife's one of my strongest assets, he said. Hard to find that kind of commitment these days. Asset. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm sure. Evan smiled, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. You're a lucky man. The implication was clear. The power dynamic wasn't hidden, it was displayed openly, confidently. Evan wasn't worried about boundaries because he didn't believe they applied to him. He had status, influence, access, and Rachel, whether she realized it or not, was orbiting him. On the drive home, Rachel talked animatedly about the event, about opportunities, about how impressed Evan was with her work. Daniel listened, hands steady on the wheel, mind elsewhere. She never once asked how he felt, never noticed his silence. That told him everything. In that moment, Daniel understood the imbalance clearly. Evan had power at work. Rachel gave him access at home, and Daniel was expected to stand quietly on the sidelines, grateful and trusting. That expectation hardened something inside him. He wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding anymore. He was dealing with entitlement, Evan's and Rachel's acceptance of it. Guessing would only keep him reactive, emotional, predictable. Daniel decided then that he was done guessing. He didn't need proof. He needed timing. Daniel didn't change overnight. There was no dramatic shift, no announcement, no cold shoulder that would have given him away. What changed was internal, subtle, intentional. He stopped reacting. When Rachel came home late, he didn't ask questions anymore. When she offered explanations, he nodded without comment. When she mentioned Evan's name, he neither stiffened nor challenged it. His calm became consistent, almost unreadable. And in that calm, he began to see clearly. He started paying attention to details the way an analyst would, because that's what he was. Dates, times, patterns, Mondays and Thursdays that ran late, meetings that always ran over after certain hours. The way her stories shifted slightly when repeated. Small contradictions she didn't notice because she assumed he wasn't listening. He never wrote anything down physically. No notes, no evidence to be discovered. He cataloged it all in his mind. Each detail placed carefully, methodically, not to confront, not yet, to understand. Detachment followed slowly, like a tide pulling back from shore. Daniel mourned the marriage quietly. He grieved the woman he thought he knew, the future he'd once planned with certainty. He allowed himself moments of sadness, brief, controlled, private, no breakdowns, no chaos. Pain, he realized, didn't require destruction to be real. At night, lying beside Rachel, he stared at the ceiling instead of her. He listened to her breathing and felt the emotional distance widen. It hurt, yes, but the hurt sharpened him instead of breaking him. He wasn't numb, he was focused. Dignity became his anchor. He thought often about self-respect, about how easily people surrendered it in the name of love. He'd seen friends beg, bargain, demand explanations that led nowhere. He understood now that chasing clarity from someone invested in confusion was a losing game. Respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you withdrew. Rachel noticed the change, but she misread it. She assumed his silence meant trust, or indifference, or weakness. She grew more careless with her excuses, more comfortable disappearing for hours without notice. She stopped checking in altogether, and Daniel let her. He used the extra time to imagine his life without her. Not in anger, not in fantasy practically. Mornings without tension, evenings without waiting. A future where his peace wasn't dependent on someone else's honesty. The idea scared him less than he expected. He began to detach from shared routines. Ate when he was hungry, slept when he was tired, stopped organizing his life around her schedule. Each small act felt like reclaiming territory he'd slowly surrendered. One night, as Rachel scrolled through her phone on the couch, smiling at something he couldn't see, Daniel felt the last thread of hope loosen. Not snap, just release. He stood, grabbed his jacket and went for a walk without explanation. The cool air steadied him. He realized then that love without reciprocity wasn't loyalty. It was self-erasure, and he was done erasing himself. By the time he returned home, his path felt clearer. Not painless, but clear. He didn't know exactly how it would end, only that it would end on his terms. The timing mattered. Patterns always repeated. People who thought they were in control grew predictable. Rachel's habits had become reliable in their inconsistency. Daniel no longer wondered if something would happen only when. That knowledge brought him an unexpected calm. He showered, turned off the lights, and lay in bed beside her, eyes open, waiting, not anxiously, patiently, because the moment he'd been preparing for wasn't a surprise anymore. The message arrived exactly when he expected it. The message arrived at 9:57 p.m. Daniel knew the time without looking at the clock. His body had learned the pattern before his mind ever admitted it. He was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a glass, when his phone vibrated softly against the counter. He didn't rush for it. He dried his hands first, slowly, deliberately, as if nothing in the world was about to change. Then he picked up the phone. Staying late with my boss again. Wait. The words looked smaller this time, weaker, stripped of the power they once had over him. There was no apology, no affection, just instruction. Don't wait. Daniel felt no surge of emotion, no heat, no ache, only confirmation. This was the moment he'd been preparing for, whether he realized it or not. He typed a reply with the same calm he used at work when delivering bad news. Okay, one word, no punctuation, no questions. He set the phone down and looked around the apartment. The place was neat, almost sterile. It felt less like a home and more like a temporary arrangement that had overstayed its welcome. Instead of sitting on the couch or turning on the TV, Daniel walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. He didn't rush, he didn't panic pack. He chose carefully work clothes, essentials, items that belonged to him before the marriage blurred everything together. He found the ring next. It sat in the small wooden tray on the dresser where Rachel had left it weeks ago after taking it off for work reasons. Daniel picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. Once, it had symbolized promise. Now it felt like a relic, something from a life that no longer existed. He placed it neatly beside her jewelry, not as an accusation, but as a conclusion. Next came the photos, framed memories of smiles, trips, celebrations. He didn't tear them down or hide them. He turned them face down instead, not erased. Just acknowledged and set aside. Daniel moved through the apartment with quiet purpose. He packed a small bag, gathered important documents, left nothing dramatic behind. Closure, he realized, didn't need theatrics. By the time he finished, the apartment felt different, lighter, as if the weight of expectation had finally been lifted. He sat at the kitchen table and waited not for Rachel, but for clarity. When the door finally opened, just after midnight, he didn't look up immediately. He heard her heels first. The familiar sound, now foreign. Hey, Rachel said casually, dropping her bag. You're still up. Daniel lifted his eyes then, calm, centered. I didn't wait, he said. She frowned, confused. What do you mean? He gestured gently toward the bedroom. We need to talk. Her expression shifted as she noticed the details: the missing bag, the turned photos, the stillness in the room. For the first time in months, uncertainty flickered across her face. This isn't funny, she said. I know, Daniel replied evenly. That's why I'm calm. They stood there, the distance between them no longer emotional, but final. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse, he simply spoke. I'm done living in explanations, he said. I'm done waiting. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. You're overreacting, she tried. It's just work. Daniel shook his head slightly. It stopped being just work a long time ago. She searched his face, looking for anger, for hurt, for something she could fight against. She found none. Why aren't you angry? She asked, her voice cracking despite herself. That's when she panicked. Because anger could be managed. Calm meant he'd already left long before tonight. Rachel sat down slowly, as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her. The confidence she'd carried home just minutes earlier drained from her face, replaced by confusion that bordered on fear. She looked around the apartment again, as though expecting everything to snap back into place if she stared long enough. Daniel, what is this? She asked. Are you trying to scare me? He didn't sit. He leaned lightly against the counter, hands relaxed at his sides. There was no tension in his posture, no defensive edge. Just stillness. I'm explaining, he said. Not threatening. She shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping her. You're being dramatic. You didn't even let me explain. Daniel met her eyes. You've been explaining for months. That stopped her. He spoke carefully, not to persuade her, but to be precise. You come home late, you stopped sharing your life with me. Your priorities changed, and I was no longer one of them. Rachel opened her mouth, already forming excuses. It's my job. You know how demanding it is. Evan expects. Daniel raised a hand. Not sharply, just enough to pause her. I don't need details. The words landed harder than any accusation could have. This isn't about him, he continued. It's about us. And the truth is, I've been alone in this marriage for a while. Rachel stood abruptly, panic flashing across her face. That's not true. I love you. I just got busy. He nodded slowly. Busy is temporary. Distance is a choice. Her defenses crumbled after that. The rehearsed explanations lost their structure. She moved closer, voice softening, reaching for something familiar. I didn't think you felt this way, she said. You never said anything. Daniel exhaled quietly. I did, just not with words. Silence fell between them, heavy but honest. Rachel's eyes darted around the room, searching for leverage, anger, jealousy, a mistake she could exploit. There was nothing to hold on to. What about Evan? She asked finally, cautiously. Is this because of him? Daniel didn't react. That answer alone was enough. You don't have to admit anything, he said. I don't need confessions. I needed respect. Rachel's shoulders slumped. For the first time, the reality settled in, not that she might lose him, but that she already had. She reached out, fingers brushing his arm. Please, she whispered. We can fix this. Daniel stepped back gently, not in rejection, but in finality. I'm not broken, he said. I just chose to stop pretending. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door. Rachel followed, tears forming now, urgency replacing pride. Where will you go? She asked. Somewhere quiet, Daniel replied. He paused at the doorway, turning once more, not to argue, not to plead, but to close the chapter properly. I hope you find what you're... Daniel stepped out into the quiet street, the cool night air brushing against his face. For a moment, he paused, not out of hesitation, but to let it all settle. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't even sad, at least not the kind of sadness that breaks you. This was clarity. This was freedom. He looked back at the apartment once, its windows dark, its walls silent. That home had held love, laughter, dreams. It had also held deception, distance, and disrespect. And now, it didn't hold him anymore. He didn't need to yell, fight, or plead. He didn't need to expose lies or beg for apologies. Silence had been his shield, patience, his strategy, and walking away his victory. Daniel knew that betrayal doesn't always arrive with a bang. Often, it comes softly, in whispers, in changed passwords, in hurried phone calls, in excuses dressed as ambition. Love without boundaries invites betrayal, and ignoring those whispers for too long only trains the heart to accept it. He had seen it happen and himself had almost been complicit in his own erasure. Not anymore. Silence isn't weakness. That is the truth Daniel wanted the world to understand. Patience, observation, emotional control. These were weapons far stronger than anger. He had allowed the truth to reveal itself, and in that waiting, he discovered strength he hadn't known he possessed. Discipline had become his ally, and dignity had become his constant companion. Respect, once broken, rarely returns. He had learned this the hard way, not through confrontation, but through absence. By being calm while deception unfolded, he let the illusion crumble on its own. There is no restoring a foundation once it's been cracked by betrayal. Words, excuses, promises, they are too late. The only remedy is to walk away, whole, intact, and uncompromised. Daniel had done just that, and it felt nothing like loss. It felt like victory. The peace he now carried wasn't loud or celebrated, but it was absolute. Walking away had given him a new life, a chance to reclaim the part of himself he had almost surrendered in silence, in patience, in hope. He thought about those still caught in the quiet destruction of deceit. The friends, the partners, the ones who waited, who tolerated, who gave themselves to a love that had already moved on without them. He didn't judge them, he remembered being one of them, but he also knew the power of taking control, of choosing timing over reaction, of choosing dignity over confrontation. Daniel took a deep breath, letting the cold night air fill his lungs. His phone buzzed lightly in his pocket, a reminder of the messages, the lies, the moments he had cataloged silently over months. He didn't check it. He didn't need to. The past was no longer a chain, it was a lesson. He turned to the camera, metaphorically, speaking to anyone listening, anyone watching, anyone trapped in the same quiet storm. Have you ever stayed calm while someone underestimated you? Have you ever held your dignity while betrayal played itself out? The world wants you to react, to argue, to expose, to fight in the moment. Daniel knew the truth. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't confrontation, it's silence, observation, and the courage to walk away. Not in anger, not in haste, but in certainty, in calm. And then he paused. Let the weight of the lesson sink in. Let the truth resonate. Because someone reading this will need it, more than they realize. Have you ever stayed calm while someone underestimated you? Would you walk away quietly or expose the truth? Tell me in the comments. because someone reading this needs your answer. Walking away didn't hurt. Staying would have.